Okay, great. So on behalf of Malcolm Hoenlein, William Daroff, and I, we're very happy to welcome you to this conversation with Ambassador Elin Suleymanov, Azerbaijan's former ambassador to the United States, as he completes his distinguished tenure here. The ambassador was a longtime ambassador here and worked very closely with the Conference of Presidents and facilitated our missions and visits to Azerbaijan. He also supported Azerbaijan-Israel relations and fostered close ties with the American Jewish community. So we wanted to express our appreciation to him and bid him well as he moves to his next posting. Just to give you a little background on the ambassador, and we're going to host this conversation as well as a discussion with Professor Brenda Shaffer of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and I'll give you a bit of her bio as well, and we'll talk about the developments over the many years of our associations and potentially a little bit about the future as well. In July of 2021, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan appointed Elin Suleymanov as ambassador to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Prior to that, Mr. Suleymanov served as Azerbaijan's longtime ambassador in the US for a full decade, representing his nation's interests in the dynamically changing environment in Washington. Previously, as the nation's first consul general in Los Angeles and the Western states, Mr. Suleymanov led the team which established Azerbaijani diplomatic presence on the West Coast. Earlier, he served as senior counsel at the Foreign Relations Department Office of the President in Baku, Azerbaijan, and as press officer of the Azerbaijani Embassy in Washington, D.C. Mr. Suleymanov's experience before joining diplomatic service includes working with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Azerbaijan and Glaver Belchek, a leading manufacturing company in East Central Europe. A graduate of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Mr. Suleymanov also holds graduate degrees from the Political Geography Department of the Moscow State University and from the University of Toledo in Ohio. Mr. Suleymanov has authored numerous articles and is a frequent presenter at academic events. He speaks Azerbaijani, English, and the Russian languages. Professor Brenda Shaffer is a senior advisor for energy at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. A foreign policy and international energy specialist, she focuses on global energy trends and policies, politics and energy in the South Caucasus and Greater Caspian and Black Sea regions, Iranian national gas exports, ethnic politics in Iran, and Eastern Mediterranean energy. She's a research faculty member at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School and is currently researching and writing a book on ethnic politics in Iran. Professor Schaefer is already the author of several books and has many academic appointments, including serving as a tenured professor at the University of Haifa, visiting professor at Bifrost University in Iceland, and at the Azerbaijan Diplomatic Academy. She previously served as the research director for the Caspian Studies program at Harvard University. So Professor Schaefer, thank you for moderating this conversation with the ambassador and I think also with Malcolm. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. And we are delighted that all of you are able to be in your room together.
Thank you, Diane. And it's great to be online with all the conference representatives. While Israel this past year, is celebrating newfound open relations with several of its Arab neighbors, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and more, we should recall that Azerbaijan was the trailblazer with warm, open cooperation with the state of Israel already from its first really days of independence. Israel has had an embassy in Baku since 1993. Azerbaijan's warm conduct with Israel has really helped legitimize Israel's place in the Muslim world, and I think it was a demonstrative effect that a Muslim majority country can have warm, open relations with Israel without any domestic or regional backlash. And we appreciate Azerbaijan's role in opening the doors to other Muslim majority countries. Azerbaijan and Israel each play a role in each other's security and in truly critical issues of national security. Israel supported Azerbaijan in its 2020 war to restore sovereignty over its occupied territories. I believe that Israel's support for Azerbaijan has helped it gain even soft power in neighboring Iran among the Azerbaijanis that live there, that are a third of the population of Iran. Azerbaijan is also home to the largest Jewish community in the Muslim world, a community with no history of anti-Semitism, discrimination. Azerbaijan never talks about tolerating its minorities or welcoming its minorities because it never sees Jews and other minorities as anything different than the Muslim majority. They're simply regular citizens of the country. So I'm sitting here next to two titans that have played a huge role in this close relationship between Azerbaijan and the Jewish world, Azerbaijan and Israel. Malcolm has really opened the door and played a huge role in fostering warm relations with many Muslim majority countries. But I think he has a special place in his heart for Azerbaijan, and we'll discuss that. So I'd like to, I'll start with actually opening the first question to Ambassador Suleymanov. Ambassador Suleymanov, Azerbaijan, largest Jewish community in the Muslim world, never any danger, never any problems. How do you explain Shia Azerbaijan's special relationship to its Jewish community and to Israel?
Thank you, Brenda. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining today, and especially the Conference of Presidents for putting together this event. It's so good to see so many familiar faces, be it my good friend, Mr. Darov. I saw Marvin Fer, a big presence, a mentor in many ways. Jason is here, Shahram, so many good people. And of course, one of the people who first met me in America a long time ago, Dan Mariashu, the ever-present Dan. And then, of course, the power goes to Bobby, because Bobby Meth was the first person who met me in California. So thank you, Bobby, as well, for doing what you've done for us in California. You've been our guide. I kind of feel that this is a very unfair setup. You have put me forward because you put me right next to this dapper gentleman who is not just a titan, as Ben described, but also quite a handsome man. That's not good to be sitting in front of a camera next to Malcolm Honorine. But thank you, Malcolm, for everything you've done for us, for this relationship. I actually don't even think much about what Brenda just asked, because as Brenda pointed out, it comes natural. The Jewish community of Azerbaijan has been there for centuries. And we talk about, 2,500, 2,600 years of recorded presence. We don't know how much longer. So it's such an integral part of what Azerbaijan is today. So in some ways, to think about Azerbaijani Jews as any different from any other representative of Azerbaijani society would be that would be unusual. That's always been the case. But I'll give you several very small examples. And it's not just absence of anti-Semitism. The absence of anti-Semitism is a good thing, but why do we even think there should be any anti-Semitism anywhere? Why would you do this? I'll give you several examples. During this last war, the Second Karabakh War, there were many people who were fighting. And Azerbaijan was fighting as a nation, as a society. And soldiers from all walks of life were there, including the Jewish soldiers of Azerbaijani soldiers of Jewish background, of Russian background, other backgrounds, all together. But there's a legendary case, of course. The famous tank driver, Albert Ahradunov, who was killed, was one of the last defenders of the city of Shusha. And it's not just there's a monument to him. People who took Shusha, they often had a tank saying, "This is for Albert." And I saw an Azerbaijani soldier who walked into Shusha and said, "This is for all of the people who defended it before and died, and especially for Albert." So this is not a case of some selective approach. It's a normal situation. As we move forward with the relationship with Israel, you saw that we had opened a diplomatic ranked trade mission. The relationship is growing. I think the relationship with Israel is very comprehensive. And, people like to talk about weapons sales, security cooperation. The reality is that there's a lot on water supply. There's a lot on education. There's a lot on cultural exchanges. So for instance, when I was in Baku, I was meeting with Minister of Education, and they talk about very successful cooperation in the areas of technology. They call it STEAM, not STEM, because they also added the art element to this education exchanges, medical exchanges. Now, the ambassador of Israel, our good friend George Dick, by the way, there's a general lucky with the ambassadors, but George is a very special friend, and he's a very successful representative of the state of Israel. He was just visiting Nakhchivan, the exclave Azerbaijan has, which borders Turkey, Iran, and Armenia. And there they were talking about water management because it's a very dry area, very similar to Israel in terms of geography. Irrigation and all those things. So this is a normal relationship between two very friendly nations. And the last thing which happened just today, I know, and we've seen it happen in Turkey as well, in Greece, the wildfires, the forest fires. Azerbaijan today has offered whatever support we can to the state of Israel, and of course, if they accept the offer, we'll be happy to provide the rescues and the firefighting capabilities, just as we did for Turkey 2 weeks ago. So I think this shows how normal the relation is. I say the key factors, the two key factors we should not forget. One, and I think that describes what it is. One is the tradition, the established long-term tradition of Azerbaijani people and Azerbaijani society in which Jews are an integral part. And from that stems, of course, the connection to Israel, the connection to the Holy Land, because that's been built on a people-to-people exchange. When now people emigrated to Israel, of course, that become part of a connectivity. It's the same tissue. The other, I think, equally important factor is the political will of the leadership. There are many things which happen to be in place, and we see this around the world. We could have a bigger discussion about it. But they don't happen on their own. You have to have a leadership. And I think you have to have political will. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to push the envelope in the right direction. And I am so proud that our national leader, Heydar Aliyev, during his time, and today our president, Ilham Aliyev, are very committed to this relationship. They continue pushing this envelope. There's a connection they have. They understand the importance of having a relation with Israel. They understand the value of having an integral society in Azerbaijan in which every member of the society is equal, including the Jewish citizens of Azerbaijan. So I think that matters a lot. And I want to commend you. There is another factor which perhaps history always overlooks, and that's that leadership from the Jewish organizations. Malcolm, you guys, everybody, I mean, our good friend Dan Mariashin, Marvin Furr, Mr. Darov, all of you, and all individual Jewish members of this organization. Jason with his group, which is very active. You bring a push to this relationship, which is always important. There's a certain energy which comes from this working with the Jewish organizations. Look, when you have visits, when I talk to AIPAC, when AJC invites me to go to the Holy Land, all of these steps, they may seem disjointed, small, maybe insignificant, but they all together add to positive energy. So as I leave the United States, I want to thank and congratulate you on making sure that this relationship gets stronger and stronger. Please keep doing this. This is important because, people, and we talk with Brenda a lot about this, people take things for granted. We can't. The world is changing. We just saw what happened in different parts of the world. We should not let that happen. Let's keep pushing this. Let's keep making it stronger, build the connections, whatever, education connection, conversations, exchange of visits, whatever we can do to make sure that this ball keeps rolling and it rolls in the right direction.
So Ambassador Suleymanov mentioned that the leadership of Azerbaijan, starting with President Haydar Aliyev and then after with President Ilham Aliyev, have been strong proponents of close relations with Israel and close relations with the Jewish world. Malcolm Hoenlein has met frequently with both Haydar Aliyev and President Ilham Aliyev. Malcolm, as we sit now, this really tragic weekend with the fall of the government of Afghanistan to the Taliban, we can see how important it is, these alliances quietly around Afghanistan, whether it's flights that are able to make shorter trips to Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, overflights from Azerbaijan, getting Azerbaijani soldiers on the ground together with Turkish soldiers patrolling and providing security at the airport in Kabul. I don't know how many of you know about that, but an incredible story that, even any semblance of flights being able to taken over is thanks to Turkish and Azerbaijani soldiers that are there. Malcolm, you've played a big role in building alliances with Azerbaijan and all the countries of Central Asia. What do you think these alliances mean now for the United States, especially in light of the fall of Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, I think alliances and communication and contacts and ties are critical, not only in good times, but in bad times. It's when you rely on them, it's when you put these things to the test. And I think this weekend's events is going to put many of the relationships to the test. I think it's going to put the region to a test. But before I get to that, I just want to remind people that we've been visiting Azerbaijan for more than 2 decades. And we met with Haydar Aliyev, and people warned me when we went there because he had been the former boss of the country under the previous regime and led the transition. And he was a tough guy. When we came there, we had the first session, and I could see him start, the barriers came down very quickly, and he invited us the first day, and Dan and others who were there can attest, to dinner in his home. And we had the most remarkable visit. And we had long wanted this connection because of the history of Jews of 2,500 years. The Talmud mentions the Mountain Jews, and it's believed that they came after the destruction of the temple, or other stories about how the history began. But it's an untold and remarkable story. And for me, the most convincing moment was when we had our mission, I think in 2006, and I was briefing everybody on the first day, and I told them, don't wear yarmulke because, it's a 99% Muslim country, Shiite country, wear baseball caps or nothing. And the police chief came over to me and he said, why did you say that? And I said, well, I just thought out of respect. And he said, you can walk with a yarmulke anywhere here and no one will even look at you askance. And so it was. Not only did they not look at us askance, they welcomed us, they waved to us. We went into the synagogues and you saw Israeli flags. And we're talking about 20 years ago. And this is a long history. And when you visit Cuba and you see the oldest shtetl in the world, where Muslims on one side and Jews on the other, and for 1,600 years have lived together in peace and harmony, and you see the true nature of the relationship. It's not an artificial postcard relationship. And it led actually to the relationships then with Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, but Azerbaijan was really the frontier. And the credibility it gave us, and the credibility it gave to the effort, I think it's been very critical and it's been tested. And Azerbaijan's relationship with Israel, we don't have to go into here, but it has many manifestations. It's one country with a border with Russia and Iran. So it's geopolitical position, it's tolerance. It's a beautiful new kosher restaurant in Baku with great food and a vibrant community, synagogues, there's Jewish schools. And so it was an instant relationship, not only based on the historical facts, but on the current reality. And Azerbaijan, unfortunately, has a very big Hasbara problem, like another country we know, in getting its message across and people understanding what it is up against, how it is fought against internal extremism, the Muslim Islamist forces, and external threats from various neighbors. And when you have 30 million Azeris in Iran, it's obviously a very critical relationship. And I think that the events of this weekend remind us, one, how little people know about the area, about the Muslim world overall, and the importance and significance of perception in the region, in the Middle East, in Central Asia, and elsewhere. It's not just the facts on the ground, it's the perception. And a perception that America has abandoned the area, the perception which is widespread in the Middle East, or withdrawing from its commitments, the perception about how reliable an ally, how good our intelligence, how strong our positions are. And this goes back many years. I mean, the question of the relationship and what messages we send to those who want to undermine us, want to undermine our allies and our friends, including Azerbaijan, including the government of Afghanistan. I think that this weekend will have long-term reverberations and consequences for the whole region, for the perception of America. I think a lot has to be done now, and blaming people is not the answer, but looking for solutions, looking for positive measures that can be taken now to rebuild that confidence, to try and show the rest of the region that we're there to stay, we're committed to the principles and to the support for those who are moving in the right direction. I think President Aliyev deserves far more credit, and unfortunately, the West takes often our friends for granted. We focus on our enemies, we focus on those who are negative, but those who stand with us and do it quietly because it's a natural thing often get shunted to the side. And there's not one example, there are many examples, and we visited some of them in recent weeks where we hear from the leaders, they're hurt, they feel that they're out on a limb for America and for the West, and yet it's not reciprocated. And I think now it should call for a rethinking about how we send positive messages, we reinforce our allies. It doesn't involve necessarily troops. These people want to fight for themselves, they want to do it themselves, but they need to have, and especially America counts. America is the critical country in the world, not Europe, not others. And we cannot abandon the field to Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, others whose goals are inimical to ours.
I think it's perfect for the next question. Ambassador Suleymanov, in the decade and a half that you've served in the United States, first as consul in Los Angeles and then ambassador, can you say that U.S. policy towards the Caucasus and the greater Caspian region, including Afghanistan, has changed significantly? Why has it changed? Where do you think the U.S. sees the role of the South Caucasus today?
Thank you, Ben, once again, and thank you, Malcolm, for your kind words. You're absolutely right about the need for reinforcing the friendships and alliances. I want to make one comment about your visit, the Conference of Presidents visit in 2006. I remember Bobby was there, and that's the first one actually. Then we went to California, and that was the beginning of my posting in California. I came to your event. And I remember it was a difficult event because it was on Friday night, it was Shabbat event, so we could not use the mic. I had to scream, and we had to deal with the boiled chicken because that was
That's part of the test.
Yeah, that was the only consensus.
The only real friends. Yes.
I know. It was the only consensus kosher food we could find at the moment. But that's how my posting in America began, with this conversation with the Conference of Presidents. It's actually kind of symbolic that my last event in America is actually, as outgoing ambassador, is actually with the Conference of Presidents. So the book ending my presence in America. Thank you. And I know it would give some people some wrong ideas, but but it's actually a very good thing. Brenda, yes, actually when I worked in the 1990s, in the beginning of the 2000s, at the embassy, we saw a surging interest from the United States to our region, to the South Caucasus, to Central Asia. And then, of course, there were unfortunate events which led to engagement in Afghanistan. But it did have silver lining of engaging the countries more, building these routes. And we always, in 1998, there was an idea of building, and then Senator Sam Brownback was pushing for the idea of the Silk Road connection and connectivity. Unfortunately, that Silk Road came as a result of the military operation in Afghanistan, but it still built that backbone of the connectivity. But I have to tell you, since over the last decade, I think we have seen something that a very acute observer of the region, Vladimir Sokol, called strategic disengagement. Increasingly, we've seen the lessening of the engagement, the moving from practical cooperation, or maybe, and that's actually kind of interesting because the practical cooperation generally has increased simply because the interaction between the countries has increased. I mean, at the end of the day, today you have each of our nations, the former Soviet nations, the Eurasian nations, are now 30 years old as states. So, I mean, Azerbaijan celebrates 30 years of its independence this year. We will celebrate 30 years of diplomatic relation with the United States next year. So I can't believe it's 10 years out of 30. This is great. But at the end of the day, just simply by virtue of becoming more mature states, the cooperation, of course, has increased with exchange programs, military, mil-to-mil cooperation, political cooperation. But the imperative for engagement has decreased. And I don't know what that actually means, because the world has changed. And the United States, I think, plays a very critical, important role, although I will, of course, advocate for our good friends in the United Kingdom as well. And by the way, they have actually significantly increased their presence. If you think about this, UK is the largest investor in Azerbaijan, it's not the United States. But I think we have seen some, I don't know, you could say disturbing, or you could say natural disengagement by the United States. And I think because the question is that the United States has not worked out a clear objective of what it actually wants. Because if you, I mean, what exactly does the United States expect from us? I mean, I don't mean one administration for 2 years before they forget, or someone gets fired or retires and then they forget what they actually want. I mean, long term. Well, there was also always three backbones of the cooperation: security, defense included, energy, including economic cooperation, including energy, because energy is the backbone. And we've seen the success of the Southern Gas Corridor, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, and other projects. And then, of course, overall social, economic, or political reform in the region. But those are not abstract matters. Those are not academic conversations. Those need to be backed by practical engagement and practical moves. And we've seen that. We've seen that throughout many administrations. So, for instance, when the United States focused on the Southern Gas Corridor, or focused on the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, or focused on mil-to-mil cooperation, things happen. Very good things happen. But when we move from the realm of cooperating into this ideological discussions in which there is no answer to any question, or any question is actually becomes rhetorical, then it leads to what happens now. Second, I think Malcolm pointed out to this. The Americans need to know who they talk to and what is possible. What Americans wanted to do in Afghanistan was not possible. They were talking to the wrong people. They were trying to impose the wrong model. So we need to understand that the region has its own specific, just like the United States has its own specific. In fact, every state in the United States has its own specific. I mean, having lived in California, Ohio, and Massachusetts, and also being a frequent visitor to Texas and Oklahoma, I tell you, every state has its own culture and specifics, so same applies to people outside it.
When we talk about Afghanistan and the regional alliances, so I recall prior, after the tragic events of September 11th, but prior to the U.S. Beginning of operations in Afghanistan, the first thing it did was to reach out to countries like Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, get basing rights, get overflight rights, get transit rights, and those alliances with Central Asia and the Caucasus were crucial to the mission. And it's really too bad that it didn't think about those alliances before actually the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Sort of a no-brainer would have been, keeping that border with Uzbekistan open, Northern Alliance, which is very friendly to the West, had not been ruled by the Taliban, could have had an easy, access. And again, if the U.S. would have thought about its alliances around Afghanistan, it would have had so many more options and reduced many of these tragedies. So, Malcolm, sometimes we find that Ambassador Suleymanov mentioned how Washington doesn't always get the possible in certain places and the complexity. Sometimes we find that Washington and Tehran are on the same side of the fence in its criticism of Baku. For instance, with the hijab prohibition, Azerbaijan, like France, has complete separation of religion and state. So that means there's no state religion, there's no special status for Islam or for Arabic. It's citizenship based. And one of these things is that there's no religious symbols in schools, including hijab, covering of women. So we find Iran criticizing Azerbaijan for not allowing girls to be covered in schools, but we also find every year the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, U.S. State Department criticizing Azerbaijan because it doesn't allow, for instance, Islamic parties and organizations to receive bank transfers from Iran. It doesn't allow Islamic literature, anti-Semitic literature in from Iran in the Azerbaijani language into Azerbaijan. Again, it doesn't allow girls to be covered, giving them their freedom to choose as adults, but not to be imposed on them by their parents. How do we explain you've worked so many years as a good explaining the importance of the region to Washington? How do we explain to Washington that things that are maybe possible in a U.S. society are not so easy in countries like Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, often in order to find a balance and protect the non-religious, the minorities, the women, they can't be as open to Islamic extremists.
So I think it's not just a problem with Azerbaijan, it's a problem we hear from many countries that are fighting against forces, internal and external, and that they have to adopt measures. By the way, France was a problem. They had to adopt measures limiting imams who didn't preach in French, and then those who gave extremist messages, they mishandled it, they kicked them all out, and then brought in people who speak in Arabic and they don't know what they're saying, and set up an organization that the Islamists took over. But countries face serious challenges. These are existential challenges in many occasions, and we have to have a better understanding. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't prod and push for religious freedom, for no discrimination. In fact, if we look at the world with the sharp rise of anti-Semitism globally, including in the United States, the one part of the region where we're seeing a decrease in anti-Semitism is in parts of the Muslim world, in the Gulf, in the Central Asia, where we have had no examples. When I asked students, do you have anti-Semitism on your campus? And they looked at me and said, no, we have no anti. What are you talking about? And I said, no, do you have anti-Israel activities? Do you have anti-Semitic activities? They said, we don't even know what you're talking about. We've never experienced it. They didn't even know how to relate to the question because of full acceptance. And I saw how President Aliyev promoted and put the Jews in the most prominent positions at the World Dialogue of Civilizations, invited me to speak forth. And believe me, there were many more higher ranking people there, but he wanted to send a message, and he had there people from the Vatican, he had people from every religious faith speaking and guessing, and this is not just once, this has been multiple times. And each time before he met, and it was on the front page of the Azeri papers, it's not something that they hide. So it's not intolerance, it's sometimes necessity that dictates, and we have to try to temper that with good judgment and understanding, and try to push always for societies to be tolerant of all the people. I certainly think that Azerbaijan is. I saw women wearing the hijab, but they were adult women who obviously made their own decision to wear it or not to wear whatever they wanted. So I think, too often the Western press is very simplistic in their coverage of these very complex societies who have long histories and very delicate balances that they have to strike. And, the thought that Azerbaijan could be taken over by Iranian-backed forces or Islamist forces is so horrendous, given the geopolitical significance, the strategic importance of the country, that I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand more and to see on the ground the reality of how the president, with all the cameras, the world watching, how he took each group and treated them with respect, and the prominence, as I said, that he gave to the Rabbi Meyer and myself who were there. And this was true, and it's one of the reasons why we felt the strong bond from the very beginning was because of the spirit of tolerance, which is sometimes hard to communicate. And, frankly, the media is not interested in the good stories. They're interested only when there's a situation of conflict. When you see in the Arab world today, in Morocco, in UAE, in other places, Holocaust education, as you long had in Azerbaijan. When you see the changing of the textbooks in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and UAE, nobody writes about this. Nobody will tell the positive side of these stories, and you don't reinforce it if you don't give them credit. And to credit a country like Azerbaijan, at the same time, you talk to them and discuss whatever concerns or criticisms you have.
So let's open it up to a few questions from the group online.
So can I just remind people to use the raise hand function if they'd like to ask a question or make a comment? And Rachel, our first question, please.
First question is from Dan Mariashin of B'nai B'rith.
I don't, whoops, I'm getting all kinds of pop-ups here. I don't really have a question. I just want to make a couple of comments. First of all, Elin is just a consummate diplomat. Watching diplomats over the years in Washington, he's really at the very highest rank in terms of how he has represented his country, and not often in easy situations, but in more difficult and sometimes contentious situations. He's been a great friend, but more than that, he's been a perceptive analyst of the situation in the region. We've always had an opportunity. He's very accessible, and we've had an opportunity to discuss with him a whole range of issues, from pipelines to so many other issues. And he really went out of his way for all of us, those who have been involved in furthering, working to further relations between Azerbaijan and the Jewish people. He has gone out of his way, spoken for many of us. He's visited various communities, and we really appreciate it. More important, and my involvement in this issue goes back really to the Freedom Support Act, which was preventing US assistance from going to Azerbaijan, going back many years. We always felt it was important that there be a circle of friends and relationships for Israel outside the Middle East heartland, in the Islamic world, not just in the Islamic world. Georgia, of course, one of those countries, but mainly in the Islamic world outside the Middle East heartland. And the relationships with Azerbaijan have really anchored that prospect and that reality that we now have. And Elin has really played a very important role in all of this. We are saying, as we say, we're not saying goodbye, we're saying lehitraot, not only to his next diplomatic position, but beyond. And I just wanted really to say thank you for his friendship, not just to B'nai B'rith and myself, of course, but to all of us in the Jewish community who have worked with him.
Thank you
very much, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Dan, you know that B'nai B'rith, they're all over the world. They're not just in Washington, and they could be in London as well. Yeah, we're children. Yeah.
I'll be in.
He's your new membership chairman.
Yeah. By the way, something I want to say, Dan, in addition to thanking you, I've been always feeling very jealous and envious of my Georgian friends and colleagues and neighbors, because they were able to issue, if I'm not mistaken, a post stamp in honor of your father, who was a rabbi in Tbilisi.
Wow.
And I always wanted to come up with something like this, and Georgians has always beat us to that. So
He's muted. Okay, let's move on.
No, it was from my great uncle, who was the rabbi in Georgia. But if you're issuing a stamp, maybe you'd consider putting Malcolm on it.
They'll be on the backside.
let's not go there.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Jason Guberman of the American Sephardi Federation.
Thank you, Elin. Thank you for your distinguished service, and above and beyond your official duties, you've built a real relationship with the Jewish community, which has somehow remained unscathed even after we danced the Hora together in DC. You know, that event was the Azerbaijan's National Day. I was speaking to the Israeli military attaché, and after he had heard, you know, the umpteenth Jewish song, he said to me, "What the heck is going on here?" And I said, "This is Elin's playlist. I mean, he told the DJ which songs to play and what the band should play. So this is a testament to not only your good taste in music, but also the depth of the relationship with Azerbaijan and the Jewish community, which I hope will continue. And it is so hard to tell this story, to tell people in Azerbaijan, Shia and Sunni pray in the same mosque, or that there's 500,000 Christians. I was speaking to the head of a Christian organization, didn't realize there's 500,000 Christians in Azerbaijan. Not only that, but when we were there and visited a monastery, the Christians showed us the pictures on the wall, how proud they were to have gone to Israel and donned kippot when they were at the Western Wall. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question, so I'm not going to let you off so easy. Given the situation in Afghanistan, given the situation in Yemen with the Houthis, what role can Azerbaijan, as a secular republic, a Muslim majority country, an ally of the US and Israel, home to Jewish and Christian communities and a diversity of other voices, what role can Azerbaijan play to counter Islamist extremism? And I'll specifically mention I had the honor of visiting the Institute of Theology. I think we were one of the first visitors there, and they were so proud to say they already had Hebrew on the curriculum for teaching the imams. So this is the kind of thing that was in 2018 that we need to bring to the world, and I think Azerbaijan has a major leadership role here.
Thank you, Jason. You know, the funny part of this dancing exercise at our National Day is also that our DJ is brilliant, but he's also Egyptian. So I think we bring everybody together. One thing I failed to achieve, and that remains still an objective, is to make Rabbi Shem Tov dance Hava Nagila. He hasn't done that. So he's come to our receptions, he hugged me. He actually spoke very nicely at my farewell at the Turkish ambassador's house, by the way. But he still hasn't danced with me, so we're not there yet. There's still a long road to. Jason, I think Azerbaijan is doing what it can. I mean, let's remember, Azerbaijan has its limits in terms of the size and the overall size and population. We are, at the end of the day, we could be a middle power, but we're not a major superpower to affect things like Yemen or Afghanistan. But Azerbaijan does lead by example. I mean, remember at one of the APAC events, I think it was 2015 or 2016, I spoke to Jerusalem Post reporter, and I said, Azerbaijan opens the doors, and you would see that soon other Muslim nations and Arabs will come and join and will be very friendly with Israel. He said, that's not going to happen. I told him, you know how many times people told me that's not going to happen, and it happened, remember, Brenda? So I think we do what we can. And Azerbaijan has tried our best. I think we're racing with time. By the way, along with our Central Asian friends and colleagues, I have to say that, because we should put credit where the credit is due. Central Asian nations have actually worked very hard to make sure that Afghanistan becomes a success. This inclusivity projects, building the connectivity with the Lapis Lazuli, Silk Road. Turkey plays a major role in trying to incorporate Afghanistan into this positive environment, but we didn't manage to do that on time. That's one of the things, but we tried. Now, going back to radicalism and issues like that Brenda mentioned and Malcolm spoke about, I think there's also a general misconception, especially in the Western media, about things. Most of my leadership are very devout Muslims. I mean, we are believing Muslims. I mean, I know people think that just because I talk to my Jewish friends and I have this very strong relation with the Jewish community, we are somehow not really close to the Islamic faith, or we're not devout. That's not true. I think the fundamental factor which Malcolm mentioned is that there is no conflict between Islam and Judaism. We strongly believe that if you are a good Muslim, you actually must be a good friend of the Jews. I mean, that's a very normal thing. So, in fact, I think this is a very, very unconscionable that people think, if, and that we're often directed at the person, if you're good with the Jews, you must be a Jew. No. In fact, many of the people who are very good to the Jews, very good with the Jews, and Israel are not Jewish, and that's a very normal thing. So the policies Azerbaijan implements and approaches Azerbaijan promotes are rooted in very practical decisions. They're not ideological. Ideologically, in many ways, Azerbaijanis, and including my very top leadership, are very good, very devout praying Muslims. In fact, very often what we do is actually in the benefit of the Muslim community, because this is what we want. We want an educated, advanced, progressive community, which makes Islam benefit, succeed, and become a very successful community. I mean, I think that's what people don't understand. And it's sometimes actually ironic when people who know nothing about Islam other than a couple of books would come to you and begin lecturing you, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. And I'm like, hey guys, we've been doing this for several 100 years. Okay, honestly, let's not get into this discussion. So I think in that way, what Azerbaijan and Central Asian nations and others are doing are just setting an example. And we're hoping that that example would have some influence. This is perhaps a very difficult day to talk about this because of what happens in Afghanistan. But then, we've seen this movie before. I'm old enough to see the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. And I know people say don't make false comparisons. And that comparison would be, of course, very false because the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Afghanistan was orderly. It was not accompanied by violence. And the Soviet-installed government lasted, I think, for more than a year afterwards. So, yes, that would be a false comparison. But overall, the underlying theme is the same, is that neither great power was able to read and understand Afghanistan and its people. And I think that's, if any lesson is there, is that, you need to listen to the people on the ground.
One of the things I think people forget is that these governments face constant challenges, even if it's not public, and because they keep calm visage, it's not reflective necessarily of the reality. And we need to constantly reinforce the positive forces, whether it's in Morocco or it's in Egypt or it's in Azerbaijan. All these countries face challenges that the West is too often ignorant of and looks to meet our standards or our approach and doesn't see things through the eyes of the people with whom we deal. And I want to thank Brenda, who has been an interpreter, an interlocutor, an intermediary, and helped foster all of this, but also to get us to understand what the dynamics are in these countries. And it's something we have to do much more. When the Iran 13 got arrested, these Muslim countries stood up and did stuff that was so remarkable. I saw the letters, and I tell you honestly, I cried when I got some of them, because remember, we coordinated the effort around the world. And they told Iran point blank, we will sever relations with you if any of these 13 are hurt. And they stood up to the test because it wasn't easy going against the Ayatollah at the time and doing what they did. So, there's much more to the story than appears sometimes in the headline. And also, these Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan saved more than 500,000 Jews in World War II. They found refuge there, escaping from the Russians, and we were the first to honor them, both at the museum and earlier, to pay tribute to them for what they did. And the circumstances were complicated, we understand, but the reality is, in Samarkand and Bukhara alone, you had 200,000, I think 80,000 in Azerbaijan, 200,000 Kazakhstan. That those historical facts have to be also known and shared and taught, just as we want them to teach the realities of our history and to give a fair presentation of the realities.
Ambassador and Professor Schaefer, we still have a few questions. Can we take an extra 5 minutes if we need it?
Sure.
Okay, great. Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Betty Ehrenberg of the World Jewish Congress.
Thank you very much. Thank you too, Ambassador. We will miss you. We very much hope that whoever takes your place will see you as a role model and follow in your footsteps, and will, as you said, keep the ball rolling because it is so important. I wanted to ask you, we had mentioned Turkey, and looking over recent couple of years regarding Turkey and what seems to be a changing role depending on what's happening in the region. Do you see perhaps a more positive contribution coming from Turkey at some point, whether in NATO, whether in the Middle East, as the turbulence seems to continue? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Betty. It's always good to see you, and and I appreciate you being always a great supporter of Azerbaijan. Thank you. And that's perhaps the point with some of my very good and very best friends may disagree with me. I do believe that Turkey is a very positive influence in the region. We've seen it. Turkey has probably the longest standing history of supporting the Jewish people. It's the first Muslim nation to recognize the state of Israel. And I know very often being caught in the heat of the moment, it's difficult to take a historic view. But if anything we learn from Afghanistan today is take a historic view, take a longer view, look at what happens and look at the actions. I mean, when AJC invited me to Israel, I went on the Turkish Airlines flight, and because that was the most frequent and the most comfortable flight to go in and out. I'll tell you today, if we speak about NATO, Turkey is perhaps the most functional military in NATO. And what Brenda pointed out earlier today is that in Afghanistan today, in Kabul, 120 Azerbaijanis, which are we don't even neighbor Afghanistan, standing shoulder to shoulder with a much greater, bigger number of Turkish troops protecting the airport. Not anybody else. No other NATO power, no other NATO force stands there. I mean, it's easy to criticize Turks, right? But today, when the push comes to shove, who stands protecting the last barrier, the last frontier in Afghanistan? It's the Turks and 120 Azerbaijanis. And I think that is a lesson we need to remember. We should also remember that there is actually a very strong sentiment between the Turkish and the Jewish people. And I've seen it myself. I'll give you several examples as well. My farewell here in Washington, I had a couple, but one of the most prominent one was at the Turkish ambassador's house. And at the residence of the Turkish ambassador, it was his initiative. He tried to invite the ambassador of Israel. I understand it was a wind or I don't know, storm, something. The ambassador could not go, but it was his initiative. He told me, I want to sit down, I want to invite the Israeli ambassador to have a conversation with him. There was a Rabbi Shem Tov spoke there, and he spoke not only of his relationship with Azerbaijan and myself, but also very much about the relationship with the Turkey and the Turkish ambassador, their friends. Rabbi Mendy Chitrik, who is now the head of the chairman of the Alliance of the Rabbis in the Muslim nations, is actually traveling around Turkey, showing illustrating his legacy of the Turkish Jews. I think those are important things which are happening, and overall, I see a very positive trajectory. Whatever Azerbaijan can do to promote that, we will do, because I think, for us, look, everybody in America has had at some point a Thanksgiving dinner, right? And I'm pretty sure all of your relatives, all of your members of the extended family, they all get along very well. So for Azerbaijan, the Turkey-Israel relationship is a Thanksgiving dinner, okay? We will have the family, friends, but sometimes they have certain issues. And sometimes issues are not really that serious, but there's some memories and all this. So I am very positive about this relationship, and I wanna plug in for the Turkish ambassador, who's been as a newly elected Turkish ambassador, Mr. Murat Bajan, but he seems to be very proactive. He seems to actually try to build this relationship. So, and I know Brenda knows him as well, and I think I think that effort and his effort should be supported, and you understand it. I mean, we all understand it. That's not an effort which comes from his own initiative. We have to understand it. I mean, it's obviously somewhat understanding which stems from Israel itself.
But it's very complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is complicated.
It doesn't make up for other realities.
Realities change sometimes.
Yeah. Thanksgiving, as we said.
That's a part of the family.
We're not identifying who's the turkey.
Yeah. Also, I want to say that you mentioned that our new ambassador, the newly appointed ambassador, Azar Ibrahim, is a very professional, very distinguished ambassador. He served at NATO. He had the added benefit of coming straight from Ankara. So that could be a positive thing. I think our long-standing friends such as Dan Mariashin may know Hazar personally because he worked at the embassy here in Washington for a long time. So I'm very hopeful to see some positive results, and I wish him every success. He's a good man, and he's a very positive contributor to our relationships.
I think Bobby had a.
Yeah, we've still got a couple of questions if we can keep going. Rachel, and I'll remember that Thanksgiving dinner analogy. That's a good analogy. Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Bobby Meth.
It's a very bittersweet experience for me today to be saying goodbye to you. But it's great that Brenda's there to at least be a constant, and hope you'll still be with us in the future, Brenda. Elin and Lala were newlyweds when they came to LA. And I remember before they were even in an apartment, they didn't even have a residence. They were still staying in a hotel. I insisted they come on the AJC consular tour of Jewish LA, where we ended up the evening at Friday Night Live at Sinai Temple with David Wolpe. And Elin said to me, he wants President Aliyev up on that bima singing Shabbat Shalom while he was there. Well, that didn't happen, but a lot of other things did, including we went to dinner once at a restaurant right on the ocean. And I swear, as soon as Lala and Elin showed up, a school of dolphins swam by as if to greet them. But I feel sorry for Lala, because you've taken her from LA's weather to Washington, D.C., and now you're bringing her to London. If this marriage lasts, it's a miracle just for that. So, but since Jason asked you a serious question, I'll ask you a serious question that I asked you probably 12 years ago that I want an update. What is Azerbaijan doing to diversify its economy?
Thank you. We'll miss LA forever, and thank you for being there. In fact, yes, that was a great evening at the Sinai Temple. And by the way, I have never seen so much fun, people dancing and singing. But Rabbi Wolpe actually did travel to Azerbaijan, and he visited Azerbaijan, and he brought Sefer Torah to our community. So that's, I think, is a good sign. And so we're very grateful for this relationship. And you remember, that was not just the dolphins in that restaurant. That was a restaurant in front of which we had LA had one of the most anti-Semitic incidents ever happened. This is a very strange place, I have to say. But we had to take me there, of course. We are, overall, Azerbaijan, I think the growth of the non-oil sector has been much greater than the growth of the Azerbaijani economy than the energy sector. But I have to be careful. We want to diversify, but and we're moving from oil mostly to gas now. But we have to be realistic, because the reality is that energy is still the backbone of so many economies. We could talk about this, we could have wishful thinking, but the reality is what it is. But I'll give you several examples. In the liberated territories, most of the development will not be energy-based, except, for instance, in Zangilan and Jabal regions, BP is investing millions of dollars into solar energy plants, which is important. So we will have an alternative energy production there. There are tourist routes, there's a wine production, there's an education cities being built. The agriculture efforts, by the way, Israelis are participating in building the agriculture, including the buffalo farms.
Right.
Buffalo farms in Zangilan. So I think there's some positive developments in those areas. But the reality, we should remember that energy remains the backbone of development in our part of the world. And the issue is not to get rid of energy, but to how to use it efficiently and ecologically clean. That's a different issue. But this is something we're working very closely with our partners.
Thank you very much. Rachel, next question, please.
The next question is from Mindy Stein of Amuna.
Thank you, Ambassador. I was not around in 2006 yet with the Conference of Presidents, but I was very fortunate to travel with B'nai B'rith International to Azerbaijan. And besides touring your beautiful country, we met with many ministers. And one of the ministries we met with was religion, the Ministry of Religion. And like I thanked him, I want to thank you for being such a model in the region for tolerance and coexistence. You've made such a difference. But I want to tell you actually a story before I ask my question. When we met with the Minister of Religion, he told us he was very influenced by an Orthodox woman, Jewish woman, who taught him Russian. And he said she made up most of the village because she had 12 children. But you could see the warmth on his face and the smile when he was talking about her. It was very moving, actually. My question is, has Azerbaijan, being that model of tolerance and coexistence, made any comment about the upcoming Durban conference?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. I'm actually, I don't know. And although I am sitting in New York today, next to Malcolm, I have not been involved with our multilateral diplomacy or our mission to UN or their work. I mean, this is really not something I've done either in my capacity as ambassador to the United States or in my upcoming capacity as ambassador to the United Kingdom. So I honestly don't know. I can't answer your question. I can definitely look into this, but I don't know the answer.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. And I guess to follow up on Mindy's question, we would encourage you to go back to your government to encourage that they will boycott the Durban conference because of its soiled history of being a purveyor of anti-Semitism and hate. On that note, though, it is my honor to close this session to thank you, Brenda, for facilitating this conversation, and Malcolm as well for your contributions as always. But most importantly, Ambassador, for you, for your friendship with the Conference of Presidents, for your friendship with the American Jewish community, for the friendship of the Azeri people and the Azeri government with the Jewish people in the state of Israel, as you mentioned, working on 2 millennia. So we thank you for your leadership role. We know that you will continue to be a friend of our people and of the one and only eternal homeland of the Jewish people as you continue working your way through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan. And we look forward to continuing that relationship with you and with your successor.